Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. Today I'm going to show you how to install the CNC upgrade kit and the faceplate on the Radiomaster TX16s. After Radiomaster launched the CNC upgrade kits and the upgraded faceplates on these radios, I contacted them and asked them if they'd like me to put a video together showing how to do the upgrade, and they said, you know, that'd actually be a good idea. So the video today is about installing the CNC parts and the faceplate on a stock TX16s. Now mine's not completely stock, I've got a few trinkets on there, but as far as the hardware goes, it's stock hardware. So as I go through the upgrade process, expect me to do some jump cuts and speed up the video in certain points. Okay, the first thing we need to do is break the first radio down, so I'm going to move all of this stuff out of the way and reset the desk, and we'll get this initial TX16s broken down. Before I begin the teardown, I have to let you know this video is sponsored by Radiomaster. I'd like to thank them for sending the CNC kit and the faceplate out for review and for install so we can show you guys how to do it. And make sure if you're in the market for these components, I'll put some affiliate links in the description so you can go out there and get them for yourself. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Now I recommend getting a nice puffy towel to do this on because that'll help you with a couple of different things. Number one, it'll prevent you from scratching anything up on the front. Number two, if you drop a screw, instead of having it bounce off a hard table, it'll land on a towel and it'll give you a better chance of catching it. And then number three, it'll prevent you from damaging things like your gimbal sticks up front. So if you've never torn a Radiomaster TX16s apart, we'll start with the battery, get that out of the way first. And then on the top, there are a couple of screws holding this antenna plate on. We'll just take those out. And I have a big stack of bowls to help me keep groups of parts together. So my strategy for doing this teardown will be to try and avoid disconnecting whatever I can. If I can avoid disconnecting a wiring harness, I will. If I can remove a set of parts together, I will. All right, with the antenna mounting plate removed, the next thing is just to pop the side covers off. And we will set those aside because they're not going back on this radio. The next thing are 4 screws, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. Alright, with the back plate removed, don't just rip it off because you have a speaker connection. You got to find that with your fingers and just separate that from the main board. And then there's a second speaker connection on the newer TX16s radios. So if you have a rear speaker, you'll have 2. If you don't have a rear speaker, you'll only have 1 speaker lead. And that 1 speaker lead won't have to be taken out. Let me clarify that a little bit. If you have a speaker on the back of your radio, you'll have 1 lead going from the speaker to your motherboard and then another lead going to the front firing speaker. If you don't have the rear facing speaker, you'll only have the single speaker lead on the main board, and that speaker is tucked under the multi-protocol module. So you won't have to separate a speaker lead from the back plate if you don't have a rear speaker. Hey, if you like the work I do here on RC Video Reviews, please consider joining me on Patreon. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can help me keep making videos just like this one. If you'd like to help out, there's a link in the description and on your screen. Now at this point, before you go any farther, I'd highly advise you to take a picture. Take a picture of the motherboard, take a picture of all these connectors, try and get as many photographs as you can so that if you have a problem, you can refer back to your pictures for things like orientation and helping you figure out which way the pins go on and so on. So a real good idea at this point to take a picture if you've never taken one of these apart before. I'm going to start by disconnecting the gimbals and taking the gimbals out first. So that's the gimbal lead for the right hand side. This is the gimbal lead for the left. And the gimbals actually come out with just 4 screws after you disconnect the leads. And that's 2 gimbals removed. So I'll keep my gimbals and those screws together for the reassembly. Now you can see with the gimbals out of the way, it looks much less intimidating, doesn't it? And also notice down here on the main board, I'm going to try and avoid disconnecting as many things as I can. These are the beauty plates for the gimbals. We'll set those aside because we've got upgraded ones with the new kit. And then for all of you guys that wanted to know how I got those red rings in my radio, this is how. These are 3D printed parts and they're gimbal spacers. Available on Thingiverse if you've got a 3D printer. Although the CNC kit does come with color matched gimbal spacers, and I'll be using them in my case. Alright, with the gimbals and the spacers completely removed, the next thing I'll do is take out the multi-protocol board. And there we go. There's a complete antenna and multi-protocol assembly removed from the radio. Next, we'll remove the switch nuts. It's best if you have a tool for this, but if you don't, just put a straight slot in there and use your finger and just kind of give it a little bit of leverage and you can normally spin them off. A lot of times I can get them off with just my hands. These two were a little bit stubborn, so I had to use a screwdriver, a straight slot, but it's not that hard to get them off. You don't need to have the tool, in other words. I'm also going to remove the mounting screws for the potentiometers on the side because they're in the same harness and I really want to avoid unplugging as many things as I can. So it's easier just to pull these parts out with the rest of the harness that I plan on pulling out together with the switches. Okay, so there's the potentiometer. There's one set of switches and there's the other. You see what I mean about leaving them connected? If you just leave them connected to the main board, the idea is to try and take the whole main board out as a unit. Next up is the USB daughter card and the 3.5mm jack daughter card. They're one and the same. The 2 screws hold that down up on top, one there and one over here. And that unit will also leave connected. We'll just try and avoid disconnecting everything. And then below that are S1 and S2 pots. So there we go. That came out with just a little bit of finagling. Just walk it out and just be as gentle as you can. Just go slow and take it easy and be careful. All right, the next thing that we'll do now that we've got all of our buttons and pots and switches disconnected is we're going to try and take out this daughter card. And one here on the top right. And then on the bottom left, there's another one. And the bottom right. This bridge connector over the ribbon cable has to come off as well. And I'll just leave those 2 screws right in that bridge. All right, now I think that comes loose and it looks like it does. There's one other thing we have to do, and that's to remove the ribbon cable. Be very careful with this. You do not want to mess this part up. What you're going to do is just get a straight slot in there and just get it to pop up gently, gently. It pops straight up. And then with that done, we can disconnect the jog wheel and the nav buttons. And it looks like this whole unit should just come right out together. There we go. That's what you're after. This is what I mean about minimizing the disconnections you make. All right, so that whole thing came out together and all my connections are still there. That's a lot less work when I put it back together. So all the screws that I used and all the switches and all the boards are in this bowl by themselves. And now you can start to see we're really getting down to it. All that's really left is the motherboard, the display, and the buttons. And we also have our 6-position switch up here that needs to come out. Okay, there's our nav wheel, and I'm going to leave the screws together on that as well. And what I mean by that is that these have different size screws, and if you can just leave the screws in the board itself without taking it apart, that's going to make assembly a lot easier. So I'm just going to leave that in my bowl as one assembly and just set it aside, and there we go. Okay, this is the push button assembly, and notice that on the new setup with the metal buttons, the top switch is offset. This is the original. We'll be replacing this with the new one that comes with the kit. All right, the next thing to do is disconnect the haptic feedback motor from the main board. And then there are 4 screws holding the main board down. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll take those out. There's no reason at this point in the game to disconnect the ribbon cable from the main board. Just leave it connected. There's no point in taking it off, so just leave it alone. Okay, on the bottom of the main board there are a couple more ribbon cables, and you have to be very careful when you pop these free as well. They work the same way as the display cable up top. You just get a small blade under there and gently lift that piece up. Same thing on this side, very gentle. Just give it a little bit of a twist and that'll pop right out, and there you go, main board's out. Those are my main board pieces. I'm going to set those aside now. And we are getting down to it now. We're down to the LCD. And there's the LCD removed. Since I have it apart, I'm just going to give it a quick little wipe down and get rid of the dust. Okay, we'll set the LCD aside. Well, the hardest part is behind us. Now the radio's gutted. All we need to do is remove the faceplate. Aha, I found 2 hiding. Right here in these little pockets are 2 other screws. I didn't see those, they were hiding on me. Right in the middle of the radio. That makes sense. They gotta go too. What you heard pop out there were the system button, the model button, the plastic button, and the lower faceplate. And there's the top faceplate. Yeah, no damage. It just came apart real easy. I think we might need to save this clear plastic piece though, the LED indicator. I think that's got to come off. I don't remember seeing that in the kit. I'm going to take it off and set it aside just in case. Okay, that's the radio completely broken down. The only thing left on there is the haptic motor and the rubber cover for the bottom. That's it. It's completely broken down. All right, we're going to set this aside for just a minute. I'm going to show you the front plate. With the faceplate, you'll get a lower section, the main faceplate, and the top section for your pots. And then you'll also get the CNC system button and model button. When you start putting it together, you got to put the system and model buttons in the lower faceplate and then snap that into the main faceplate. So I'll do that first and show you what that looks like, and then we'll go from there. The idea here is to get the lower faceplate on and have that model button and system button be in their captured spot and be able to move freely. Okay, with those two buttons on, it's time for the TX16s to get its new faceplate. There you go. Just take your time and make sure it's seated. There will be a gap on the side. That's normal. That's for the grips. So don't worry too much about that. That's normal. And then once you've got it seated on the corners and everything looks nice and flush, you can flip it over and we can start putting things back together. Okay, there's the faceplate installed, and let me just recap what I did in terms of screws here. You've got two screws, one right here and one right here, to hold on the plate that covers the S2 and S1 pots and the 6-position switch. And then after that, you've got one here, one here, one here, one in there, the hidden one, in that little galley down there. One here on the side of the lower plate. Here's one on the bottom of the lower plate. Here's one down here by the haptic motor. Here's another one that holds the lower plate onto the main plate. Here's one in the corner. Another one in the galley. Here's one on the side. And then we're back up top. So obviously you want to use up the same amount of screws that you took out. That's the main thing. I'm also going to put my LED indicator back in. I'll also point out that they send you a bunch of screws to do the replacement, but I don't see any reason not to reuse the ones I already had. They seem to be working just fine. There's no reason not to use them. Okay, now we're going to reverse the order that we took everything apart in. We're going to take the LCD and pop that back in place. Now the LCD hold down bracket only came with 3 screws. So 2 on this side and then 1 over here down on the bottom. Okay, that looks good. Next up is the main board. Remember, we had 2 ribbons that we took off to take the main board out. We've got to put those ribbons back now. And this is a little bit fiddly. All I can say is take your time, go nice and slow, and make sure they're in correctly. To make sure it's in correctly, just give a very gentle tug. Don't monkey fist this. You can rip it out. Just a gentle tug to make sure it's secure. That's all you need to do. Okay, after you have that connected, give it another gentle little tug. Make sure that white cable is tucked around the front side like that. You can use the holes on the bottom for the UART pins as a guide, and then also notice that there is a small little flap right there that helps keep that motherboard from flopping around. You'll know you have it in right when you can see on the bottom that that USB-C port is perfectly aligned inside its mounting hole. Don't force anything here. Just be very gentle. Take your time. It'll seat back in there. You just kind of have to work it a little bit. You'll also know you have it right when the screws just screw right back in with no pressure at all. I mean, there is no pressure. I'm not stripping anything. It's not going in sideways. Just take your time. That's the key thing on this part. Just take your time. And go ahead and reconnect your haptic motor. And that's it. The motherboard's installed. Now we can move on to the switches. We get to actually break out our first piece of CNC gear that's new with the kit. And I'll give you a warning about this. This metal tree that the switches come on is very thin, very thin. So be very delicate with this. Don't force it. If you do, it'll get bent. Your buttons probably won't work the way they're supposed to. You'll just have a bad day. So be very, very gentle with this part. To be perfectly honest, it would have been a lot smarter to put that switch in on the lower half faceplate before I ever attached it. So if you're following this video, go ahead and put that switch in before you add the lower half of the faceplate. I also want to point out why they include the new push buttons. Here is the system button, and you can see that this is offset to the left. It's no longer in line with the rest of these buttons on the back. So that's why you have to use the new push buttons. I will just take the screws from the old one and set that back aside, and we'll just mount the new one. You want to make sure these are good and snug, but don't over tighten them. You'll be very sorry if you do. Do not over tighten. Just make sure they're on there good and snug, and make sure you got good tactile feedback on the other side. Okay, now we can move on to our jog wheel. All right, here's the original jog wheel. All you need to do is just gently lift it up and slide it off of the potentiometer. Just be gentle about it. Don't be ham-fisted. So you take the old one and set it aside. Now we can put in our new silver CNC version. Okay, just like with the push buttons, it's a good idea to flip this jog wheel over and make sure it scrolls and feels normal, and that you get a good positive click when you actuate the lower half of the button. And that feels good to me, so I'm ready to move on to the next step. Next up is the 2-hole neck strap hook. The original screw is a little too long for this one, so we'll use an M3x6 that comes with a kit. Make sure when you lay that in that it's right underneath your LED indicator. And then flip it over, and we'll just thread that M3x6 right in there on the bottom. There we go, looks good. You may choose to Loctite that too, by the way. Okay, it's actually starting to look a little bit like a radio again. Next up, we're going to pop our 6-position switch buttons back in place. You also get a CNC power button, so we'll slide that right in its spot as well. Alright, with the power button reinstalled, it's time to put in one of the big pieces again. So this is really going to be getting it back together. So this is the speaker assembly and the power activation and all of our switches. So I'm just going to carefully lay this in and try and line things back up where they go, just little by little. Make sure you get your switch wires out and don't get things blocked up. You just got to be very careful about laying things in and making sure your wires are where they're supposed to be and not getting bound up. This is just take your time. Go nice and easy. There you go. And if everything is kind of free and not pinched or bound, it just kind of drops right back into place. Okay, before we go any further, we can slide off these plastic knobs and we'll just replace them with the CNC version. They should be keyed the same, so it should just slide right back on the way the old one came off, the way the plastic one came off. There we go. Same deal as pulling them out. We'll just gradually walk them in nice and slow, and they'll set into place. Then we'll just get a couple screws out and start screwing things back in. Alright, with the knobs in, I just want to flip it over and make sure everything's moving freely and cleanly without any binding or pinching, and that all looks good. Okay, I just spent a lot more time with that power button than I think I should have, but it seems like you can't wrench this down all the way, and it's just a little snug. So I have it working right now, but it still feels like it's a little snug. Bottom line on the power button is do not wrench down on these screws. Make sure before you button things up that power button works. Make sure you feel that positive detent. You should hear that button click every single time you press that power button. And if you don't, make some adjustments on these screws until you do. Okay, up top I'm just screwing in the USB and 3.5mm jack daughter board. And that goes right on top of the card that supports the potentiometers. Okay, toggles, pots, and the 6-position switch is back where it belongs. Next I'll replace the cable for the nav buttons and the jog dial. And we'll reconnect the multi-protocol module to the motherboard. If you're going to use the gimbal spacers, now's the time to put those on. Here's a little pro tip. If you're going to use the gimbal spacers, take the 10mm screws, put your beauty plate on the gimbal, and then drop the screw in the hole, at least on the far outside holes. That'll make it a lot easier to screw these in when it gets onto the radio. Okay, with the gimbal remounted, I'll just reconnect it to the motherboard and tuck the cable down below the standoff so I don't pinch that when I button the radio up. And in case you need to know, I'm putting the rings on the outside and the 2 half circles on the inside. So drop the rings around the posts and just kind of seat it down in there, and then it's a good idea to look and make sure it's flush. Okay, I'm about to install the last gimbal, and again, take your 10mm screws and just drop them into the slots, and that'll make it a lot easier when it comes time to get these things started, especially in these back corners. The outside corners are the most difficult. And then you also need to pull the radio away from your towel. You've been working on it flush on the towel for a while, so you got to remember now that you've got sticks poking out the front, it's time to pull it off that towel. That's the last gimbal installed, and that's the last interior piece of hardware. Okay, the next thing to do is to get the back, and let's take the old handle off. And by the way, if you're not interested in doing the full CNC kit, you can still get the anodized handle separately. You can buy that as a standalone piece. The stock handle screws are a little bit too long, so they include some M3 by 6 millimeter, and those are the ones you want to use for the handle if you're going to add the folding handle. There we go. Folding handle's installed. That looks good. Okay, the radio is put back together. Now I'm going to marry the back to the front, but I'm not going to completely button it up. I'm going to do some testing first. So I'm going to connect my speaker, and I'm going to connect the speaker to the motherboard. Now I'll make sure I don't have any wires in the seams or creases. Make sure the speaker wires are tucked in. Make sure your radio wire is free to move about. And then just lay the cover down. Make sure you're not going to pinch anything. Then we'll just drop a couple screws in and just snug them up a little bit. I don't want to button the whole thing up yet until I test the radio out. There's a first look at the upgraded radio. I'm just going to connect the battery and power it up and make sure everything works.
Welcome to OpenTX. Throttle warning.
Okay, let's start by clicking the system button and then navigating over to hardware. And I'm going to start by looking at the analogs, which are the sticks. So we'll check the throttle, and notice I've got a -98, -97, and a 100. So that needs to be calibrated. And on the rudder, I got a 100 and a -100, so that looks good. On the elevator, a -99 and a +100. We got a 100 on the aileron and a -100, so the aileron looks good. Let's see, the left pot, I'm getting -99 to 100. On the right pot, I've got 100 to 100. On S1, I have -100 to 100. On S2, -100 to 100.
Return to launch. Auto tune. Auto. Training mode. Altitude hold. Position hold. Manual mode.
All the analog devices work and the touchscreen works, so that's good. Let's go ahead and check the keys. We'll exit out of this, go to keys. First is page up, got it. Page down, got it. Enter, got it. Model, got it. Return, got it. Tele, got it. System, got it. Okay, I'm going to go through the switches. SA up, middle and down. SB up, middle and down. SC up, middle and down. SD is up, middle and down. SE is up, middle and down. SF is down, that's a momentary. And then SG is up, middle and down. And SH is a toggle, and that's up and down. The trims, let's do T1, left and right. T2, up and down, good. T3, up and down, good. T4, right and left, good. T5, down and up, good. T6, down and up, good. Okay, the only thing to do is to calibrate it. So let's run through a calibration real quick. Center the sticks and pots. So I'll do that. Okay, sticks and pots are centered. Move sticks and pots and the sliders. So up, down, left, right, up, down. There we go. And now let's go back and check the analogs to make sure we got the -100 to 100. So there's -100 on the throttle and 100. The rudder, 100 to -100, good. Ailerons, 100 to -100, good. Elevator is 100 to -100. The left slider, -100 to 100. The right slider is -100 to 100. The left pot is negative 100 to 100, and the right pot is negative 100 to 100. Good. Okay, now we can replace the stick ends with the new ones. So I'll remove the grub screw. These are a slightly different shape, and I'll show them to you side by side so you can see them. The coloring looks the same. Okay, they're only slightly different from each other. The one on the left is the new one, the one on the right is the old one. And I see what they did. They drilled out the one on the left farther, so it'll sit farther down on the stick, which will help with stick height. So I'm going to go ahead and install that one. Okay, I kind of had to chase that grub screw a little bit on this stick end, so I got it. I just had to work it in and out a couple times. But I did have to chase that one with the grub screw to get it to thread on. Oh yeah, man, those are way lower. Yeah, definitely like it. Looking good. All right, let's take the other one off and put on the new one. Looks like I might have to chase this one a little bit too. So they didn't like fully deburr the hole, or I'm not sure what, but just kind of working the grub screw in and out a couple of times to try and cut that. There we go. That just punched through. Okay, now we can put this one on this side. Perfect. Okay, it's time to button this thing up. I'll give you a little tip when you're putting the tops back on these radios. There's a little tab up here between the front plate and the back plate that you have to line up. Otherwise it doesn't set right. Just verify that that's flush before you screw it tight. It always seems to want to go the wrong direction, the wrong one on top. Okay, the last thing to do is to add the leather grips, and I got asked for a detailed look at the leather grips. The guys wanted to see how they're applied. So it looks like the leather has some kind of stitching along the edge, but it's glued on to the plastic insert. So the plastic insert is kind of rubberized, and that's what fits on the radio, and then the leather is just glued on top. And the way I like to put these on is by starting with the back tabs first. Just get those to slide in there. Get those going first, and then flip it around and press this front down, and that tends to get it to line up real nice. And same thing on this one. We'll get the back tabs started first. And then squeeze the front on. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I really have to applaud Radiomaster for giving us some very cool upgrade options for our radios. This is a very tasteful scheme with the gold and silver and the brown leather, and it kind of goes real nice with the red and silver one that they sent me for review. I'm really happy with what's going on. It's hard to believe these are the same radio because they look very different, but they're identical. They're the same radio. Anyway, thanks to Radiomaster for sending this CNC upgrade kit and the rose gold faceplate. I'll have affiliate links in the description if you'd like to order some for yourself. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell if you're new. Leave a comment, that'd be great, and a thumbs up if you like the video. That's all I've got for today. Take it easy.